Good morning. My name is Tomas Ferrero, and I am in a group composed by Franco Gonzalez and Catalina Gigli. And now we are going to talk about a film called The 13th. The 13th is a documentary film directed by Ava DuVernay. It talks about the 13th Amendment of the US Constitution and how it's been misunderstood by powerful people to gain a benefit, and how did they extend slavery in legal ways using the except as a punishment for crime part in the amendment in various situations all over US modern history. It begins talking about the very next years after the signing of the amendment, and how slaveholders from the South charged black people with minor crimes so as to use them again as slaves. And then we jump onto the 70s, where people started to criticize the separation, but the government and powerful people conceived the concept of segregation, a fancy way to separate blacks from all public activities and to legalize racism. After the 70s, presidents started with the war on drugs, but always relating drugs and crime with black people. They started with Nixon, who related the blacks with heroin and hippie communities with marijuana. Then Reagan came and established higher punishments for those who consumed crack, who were the poor communities and black communities, than for those who consumed cocaine. Mass incarceration of blacks began, and this always behind the curtain of combating drug abuse and crime. And the documentary even shows how Democrats got their part when Clinton came and established very hard laws like the Three Strikes Out. Then it talks about movements for the civil rights. They always existed. In the 70s, they even got the government to finish with segregation, but never achieved much more. The Black Panthers was a movement organized by Malcolm X and Fred Hampton, who was the biggest in its moment for blacks' rights. But police and the government wanted it to be a terrorist organization, and they criminalized them a lot, even killing Fred Hampton in his house with his wife, alleging that he was a terrorist. Then the documentary starts talking about the ELEC, a conglomerate of businesses that bought legislators and started to write laws for their own benefit. The documentary finishes saying that this can happen again, that powerful people have the tools for this to happen, and that we have to be informed and ready to respond to a new attack on blacks' rights.
Well, now I'm going to talk about the topics of the documentary. First, the African American people portrayed as criminals. After the amendment, the slave owners need again the slave labor, so they began to criminalize the African American people, even in a movies such as The Birth of a Nation, where the African American people are shown as criminals, rapists, and a danger for the society because the government need them to be criminals. Second, mass incarceration as replacement of slavery. The government used any pretext to put African American people in prison, whatever for minor offenses or debts. Then, in the 70s, with the advent of crack, that was a new drug, which was used principally by the poor African American communities, the government found the perfect pretext to create new prisons for the drug block users. Third, corporate interests shape prison population. We can resume all of this in how different sectors are being shaped for increased profits. For example, Walmart started to finance a law called Defend Your Position, which refers the use of weapons to defend yourself, all in order to increase the sale of weapons and ammunitions. Also, CC8, a private prison company, began to finance a law so that more people were in prison. For example, the house pressure law that increased the sale of GPS bracelets. Finally, the dehumanization of African American people. From the beginning, we can see how different media portray the African American people as rapids, criminals, or drug addicts, finally calling them super predators. This caused them to be forbidding to go to school with white people, to use the same toilet, or even to stay in the same public places.
Of view, I think that is quite obvious the influence from media in everyone's lives. Nowadays, we need all fast and easy, and because of that, we inform ourselves using mostly television or a lot less people reading newspaper. These are our ways to be aware of the situations that are currently happening. So, if these sources of information tell us, I don't know, black is red, we don't even check if it's true. The media say that, so it must be like that. And we act in order of that. People are so focused in their own world, like thinking in work or family or life or stuffs, and don't even spend time looking to see the whole story. We just stay in what media says. The most surprising thing that I learned from this film, beside the overall history, is that even if you negate these events and actions from the government, statistics are incredibly clear. These three really blew my mind. The USA has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the prison's population in the whole world. For a black boy in the USA, the likelihood of him being arrested is 1 in 3, whereas for whites is 1 in 17. Finally, that black men are 6.5% of the US population, but they represent 40.2% of the inmates. That is just unbelievable. I learned that the governments and powerful people can use the system to create a fake idea about certain people, always under the law. And most time we don't even realize that. I still have questions about other minorities in the USA that the film never touched that theme. Well, I always knew that the prison system in the USA was a real mess, but I never imagined that it was that big. I also didn't know about the corporations manipulating laws and prisons under Alec. That was incredible because I never thought that you could make money and you could do business out of a prison. But it really formed and affirmed the idea about drugs, that drugs are a health issue, not a crime related one. So drug addicts must be sent to a recovery facility, not to a prison. And I think that is the real way to stop drugs addiction. Personally, I have the lucky to be a white person with a well economic status and in a country that women are more humanized. But I still be a woman, and that means that I can't walk alone, that I can't be alone with a boy, that I have to use a certain type of clothes because maybe if I have something provocative, I will make a man go crazy, and that is going to be my fault. I'm glad to be born in Argentina, that is so much better for women than, for example, Afghanistan. But I wouldn't live this way if I were a man or if I were black. So we all say that we are all the same, and we are, but society don't treat you like that. Well, principally, if I had to summarize the events of this documentary, I would summarize it in three words: racism, suffering, and injustice. It is difficult to understand how a human being can be treated in such a violent way just because he is different from the majority. It is also difficult to understand the political injustice that African Americans suffer and suffer nowadays in the United States, and how a simple reform can harm thousands of people and benefits others, and just because of an unknown and unjustified fear.